Good, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Flutter Care's first webinar or conversational webinar, as I'd like to call it. Today, we're going to primarily focus on mental well-being within the workplace, especially in the context of what has recently happened in the past, over the past few weeks, with an employee who was working at ENY. Before we get into that, let's just take a round of brief introductions for whoever is facilitating today. So my name is Shreya Kaul. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a counseling psychologist, and I've been practicing for 4 years now. I'm with Flutter Care as an advisor. Corey, I guess go next.
Hi everyone, my name is Gauri. I'm a counseling psychologist and psychotherapist. I've been practicing for about 2 years at this point, and I'm in the capacity of the same position at Flutter Care.
Hello everyone, my name is Kanishka and I work at Flutter Care in the capacity of a counseling psychologist. So I've been working as a psychologist for more than a year now. So yeah, that's about it.
Do we go as well? Great. Hi everyone, I'm Ashna Kaul. I'm a co-founder and CEO at Flutter Care. Anvesha, over to you.
Hi everyone, I am Anvesha Garg. I am the co-founder and CBO here at Flutter Care.
Thank you for that. For our audience members, please feel free to ask questions at any point of time. If you'd like to give us a brief introduction, even as a write-up in the comments, please go ahead and do so. We'd love for you to engage with us. We're trying to keep this a little more conversational instead of super formal. So try to engage with us if you feel like it. Um, I guess I want to start out with why we decided to keep this in the first place, and that was because a couple of weeks back, around 10 days ago, we got to know of the passing away of Anna Sebastian Perriel, who was a chartered accountant at Ernst& Young. And we got to know about this heartbreaking news through a letter her mother had written to Anna's manager at ENY. And that letter was, I think it's one of the most heartbreaking and extremely touching things I've read, because it was a very earnest request to ask her manager essentially what was going on, like what happened. These are the facts. This is what my child had been going through, and what exactly did the management and the organization do to support her through this or facilitate this, or what role did they play in this entire thing at like a very at a magnified level. There are a couple of things I do want to address in regards to this. I think the first, of course, was just the collective grief that the entire nation felt, right? I think every time a young life is lost, there is somehow the grief is a little different. Somehow the conversation is a little different, because there is this sense of, oh, potential almost has been lost. There was so much that could have been experienced. There's so much more to life than just work that could have been experienced that is lost. And then on top of that, when it also brings forth kind of the causation and the circumstances of what happened, that also kind of makes the conversation a little scarier, but also adds to that sense of grief, because work is important, right? Our employment is important. What we're doing with our time is important. So I feel like the conversation over the past 2 weeks or so has been interesting. One, of course, in terms of like the outrage, which addressed, of course, was like, what is happening? What did they do? Why didn't they reach out? Why did this happen to her in the first place? To also like the grief that we felt in terms of, I guess, not just Anna, not just everyone who loved Anna, like not just for her mom, but I do believe that grief extended to also for people who are in the field and working. Because what it did, this particular incident also got to light of the circumstances of what work life is within India, or like within not just India, I believe, but within just certain sectors, especially the corporate sector. A part of the letter, and I'd like to quote what she had written in the letter. Something that she said within the letter was, it was so succinctly and wonderfully written, because it highlighted how the issue is, of course, Anna was the forefront of her letter, but it goes beyond Anna. Just give me a second. I may have very and this is just me quoting from the letter. This is a systemic issue that goes beyond individual managers or teams. The relentless demands and the pressure to meet unrealistic expectations are not sustainable, and they cost us the life of a young woman with so much potential. Anna was a young professional just starting her career. Like many in her position, she did not have the experience or the agency to draw boundaries, push back against unreasonable demands. She did not know how to say no. She was trying to prove herself in a new environment, and in doing so, she pushed herself beyond her limits. There's something so poignant in the letter, because when we talk about something systemic, and what one means by systemic is that some rules or some particular actions or behaviors that are so consistent and so expectant of everyone that it almost becomes like an understanding, yes, this is exactly how it works. So when we say something is systemic, we mean that it's institutionalized. So it's like, oh, this is how many hours you have to give only. Oh, you're entering the corporate sector. You're expected to work whenever you have to. Oh, I can call you whenever I want to. If your manager says you have to do something by so and so hour, you have to do it. No questions asked. There is a seat, there's a particular hierarchy. There is a certain thing you can say or you can't say. You're expected to kind of, just not have any work-life balance in the beginning of your career. These are certain things that are taken for granted and systemic in the sense that no one questions it. It's almost like this is the law of the land. But this letter and especially what she said in terms of someone not having the experience and thus not having the agency, and agency being the free will and, just the autonomy or that power to say no, can be huge. I'm new. I'm trying to just, establish myself as a professional. I'm a couple. I've just stepped into the professional world. I don't know my boundaries. I don't know how to say no. I don't know, what works and what doesn't work. I don't want to leave a bad impression, but I also don't really know how to balance everything. I'm saying yes to everything, but I don't seem to have the time for everything. So there is the I'm not saying that the ask is inconvenient. But what I am trying to imply is there isn't enough time to kind of start building that work-life balance right from the get-go. I think the biggest thing with work-life balance and mental well-being within workplace is that it needs to start right from the get-go. And when we do not do that, we kind of don't train people, and like we don't teach individuals and people in the workplace, this is how I have to do it. So within like my experience as a therapist, I've almost spent, like explaining to people that this is work-life balance. When you're home and it's 9 p.m., you have to stop working. And the question often is, but how? But how do I disconnect? But how do I step away? Right? And these are skills that we also, I think, need to start really indulging in as workplaces. In terms, coming back to a bit about the collective grief, I think grief is a complicated emotion, or it's a complicated bunch of emotions. it makes no sense half the time. There is no correct way to experience it. There is no one way to experience it. There is no right grief or wrong grief. We experienced it. Um, None of us knew Anna, and I'm sure each one of us in our own way felt a little bit of what was happening in terms of, oh, for some people it could be, oh, the age was similar. For some people it would just be, oh wow, she was a woman who lost so much potential and she had life to live. For a lot of people within the workforce, it could be, oh my God, she was also an employee just like me. And we find those little minute pieces of connection by which we experience that grief. And experiencing that grief is absolutely fine. It's a way for us to express our empathy. It's how we find connection with different people in the world, even if we don't know them. And I think there is an interesting beauty in that, while there is a sadness involved with it as well. This brings an end to what I would like to say. Are there any questions? Do you want to discuss something at this point of time? The audience, do you have any questions? Thank you for joining us.
I think you mentioned very relevant points, Shreya, and I agree with a majority of it. That whole thing you mentioned about it being a systemic issue and how, it's almost embedded in us. It took me back to when I started working. I worked in a proper corporate job for about 2.5 years. And I think this whole thing of not being able to say no is something I've been through too. I used to believe I was a very self-aware, high self-esteem individual that would be able to manage, work, life, etc. And then I found myself working 14 to 16 hours. And in the few hours that I wasn't working, it almost felt like my brain was in overdrive trying to figure out how I'll manage everything I'm supposed to do. So, it actually is a toxic cycle of sorts. And it's only because you feel a lot of guilt if you don't show up in that way. You almost feel like if I say no, I'm going to prove that I'm not capable, even though it might not be in my work boundaries in that moment.
Thank you so much for sharing that, especially this aspect about saying no. I think saying no at the end of the day is literally a skill that we need to build on. And I think what really comes into this also is a very cultural context. We're not taught to say no a lot in the Indian cultural context. I think and like hierarchy really matters even when we think about school, even if we think about college, and I think this like goes into our workplace. Like junior, senior, 12th grade, with the first year, second year, third year, fourth year, you know what the power dynamics were. You knew that if someone from a senior batch could ask you to do something, you had to do it. You couldn't say no. I mean, obviously, I hope things have gotten better from the days of the bullying, but there's always been hesitation, and that's something we learn right at home. That bado ka adar karo, like always respect your elders, always do whatever they ask you to do. Try to do as much as you can to support them. Try not to say no. It's something we learn culturally right from the get-go. um, and and of course, when something is so embedded in culture, it's no surprise that it makes its way into our workplace as well. It makes its way into our own just like way of being, and that way of being enters our workplace, because those are not separate. I as an individual am entering, so what my behavior is outside will be inside as well. So thank you so much for bringing that up, because that aspect of saying no is almost like a skill that needs to be learned. You need to practice it.
I just have one thing to add on to that, which is I think the idea that you brought up, Shreya, about how it's so ingrained in us while we're growing up to actually respect your elders. And I think this is something the newer generation that's coming into the workforce now is sort of realizing that respect is not, or rather cannot, should not be demanded, but it should be earned. right? Like the idea that if I am being or feeling disrespected by my senior or my superior, the idea that I have to respect them or my respect for them does not come easy. Instead, it's just because it's demanded because of an authority position or whatever. And I think that's something that the newer generation that's coming into the workforce, that cycle is in the process of at least mending itself.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So I really like that thing. But the idea also, like, when we talk about schools and we talk about other workspaces, and I think there's something I would like to touch upon a little bit, is that when we talk about workplace, more often than not, we're just referring to the corporate sector, right? Like, for example, even this tragic incident that we heard about with Anna, and whatever's happening in and around the society and the corporate sector with respect to that, mostly you are hearing from people who are in the corporate sector, because of course there's a lot of empathy there. There's also a lot of, probably, people are feeling very overwhelmingly familiar feelings with respect to the situation because they might be in the same position. For instance, one of my very, very close friends, she herself is an employee in EY. And when I had a word with her about it, it's a very complex conversation because some of them, they don't have words to express it. And there's just a feeling, there's just a bundle of feelings. And it's complicated. And she asked me that, how are you as a therapist working with it? Because at the end of the day, you are also part of a workforce. You're working a full-time job. You are present in the workforce. And at the point that she asked me, I had no answer to it. I just had the feeling that, okay, I understand that there's an importance of work-life balance that should be maintained. I understand that with my line of work, there come certain struggles which may not be parallel to, let's say, what my friend is facing in a corporate sector. But that also led me to think about how, when we talk about workplace, we just refer to corporates. But what about educational institutions? What about non-profit or NGOs? What about government offices? Right? A lot of those spaces with them also have very stressful and unique stressors which come with that particular kind of a job. For instance, when we would refer to educational institutions, we would have, not just for students, but for teachers, we would have probably a lot of work pressure where there's a lot of workload. For instance, there's a lot of high stakes, there's pressure with respect to meeting a certain benchmark. For example, if a teacher ends up joining a very prestigious school, the idea is already present as they join that they should be teaching and getting certain kinds of results so as to maintain the bar the school is already at. Similarly, that pressure might end up projecting onto the students itself, right? Where they must feel that they had to sort of sacrifice certain kind of their childhood and their life to also maintain their marks, thus maintaining the stature of the school itself. And so I think stuff like that is very prominent to at least these kinds of spaces. And when we talk about, let's say, remote work, right? Even for corporates, even for us as therapists, even for like other professionals, it can lead to a lot of isolation. Like in my last year, I spent my last year primarily working from home. I had a private practice running, but there was so much isolation because you had to do everything yourself, be it marketing, be it networking, be it even just, taking sessions, be it having conversations. There was a lot of isolation with respect to it, even though you know that there are other people in the same sort of zone that you are, but you weren't able to reach out to them because either there was a lack of time, there was either just a lack of energy, and also the idea that I think it can foster feelings of a lot of disconnect where you're not sure how to even reach out to somebody. So your support system is very shaky, I think. And especially when hustle culture comes into space where you have to sort of maintain a certain standard, you have to maintain a certain kind of lifestyle for yourself with respect to all of that. That I think is a very lonely process to begin with. And I think one of the major struggles that I faced last year in that remote workspace was the disconnect from home to work and vice versa, because there was no disconnect. And oftentimes, when you are at home, people you're living with, roommates, parents, families, they tend to feel that घर पे ही तो हो तो ठीक है, like क्या बात हो गई, like you're home. But at the end of the day, it's your workspace. So that disconnect comes very difficult from work life to home life. And with that, I think comes a lack of boundaries as well, because you have to feel like you have to cater to not just yourself, but also to a lot of families, or to, let's say, other obligations that come with it. And I think that struggle of chronic stress, fatigue, but also to unplug from the work, because and you find it difficult to say no. Because even if you're working, let's say, in part-time jobs, which are multiple consultancies, multiple spaces, your calendar is entirely in their hands, let's say. Or maybe sometimes if you have control of it, you don't have the authority or the idea, okay, I have to maintain a certain sort of cutoff, for lack of a better word, where I have to take this many sessions in a day, and post that I have to work on my personal stuff, I have to work on marketing, work on networking. So when does that cycle end? I think, and that's something that's a very lonely process to figure out. Similarly, I think when we come to even, I think, creative spaces, like creative spaces which work for ad agencies, or just different kinds of brand strategists, sorry, pardon my language. And all of that is also a very 24/7 kind of a job, I've realized, where you don't have the bandwidth exactly, but you don't have the capacity to say no, simply because if one plan falls through and you have to come up with a second plan in the span of like an hour or one night, you have to sort of put yourself out there, and you cannot say no simply because the brand is at stake. And with that, I think point of my entire conversation is that I think there's a lot of stressors that are unique to different kinds of workspaces, not just corporates, but also I think the primary foundation of it all is that we don't know how to break the cycle for ourselves. We are in the idea and we are in the path or to a burnout, and at this point I think we're all waiting for that point to come before we realize that what is important to us, how we need to actually move away from all of that. And so yeah, I think the environment that we need to have in our spaces, which is, I think, since it starts from the get-go, like Shreya mentioned, it should ideally, there should also be a supportive structure and a team behind you, so that you're able to have that kind of a thing. Okay, if I'm feeling overwhelmed, I can actually talk about it, I can say it. But if you're not feeling supported from the get-go by your seniors, by your team members, it can be a very lonely process to figure it all out. And I think also there's a certain level of embarrassment that comes with it, that somebody ends up taking a sick day or a mental health day, as we're referring to nowadays. It's not easy to have a conversation about it. So maybe having those conversations, I think, is definitely a step forward. But I think the main process to lead the cycle to at least mending itself a little bit is that we need to have a team which is supportive, which I think a lot of spaces, maybe they're working towards fostering it, but I think there's still a lack in that department. Any inputs, any questions?
Gauri, I do want to say that, even if you try to provide a supportive team, what happens more often than not is that people get so caught up in that moment ki I have to submit this. This is the deadline. This has to be done. I have this dependency, get it done. I can't be bothered. That in that moment, you kind of forget that, I need to take a step back and realize that this person might not be in the space to give it to me.
Yeah.
And sadly, again, this goes back to a lot of what Shreya said. It's so embedded in us at this point, and also to a huge extent glorified in our minds to overwork ourselves. It, as a business student in college, I feel like in my case, it was a corporate job. Getting into one of the big fours, getting into consultancies, rag dal nahi laga to matlab nahi kiya, you've not done it right. You have to be the first one in, last one out. So it's
Yeah.
almost like you constantly want to keep turning your work around at a quicker rate also. So you will do whatever it takes to get it done. Even if it's at the expense of your sanity or someone else's, a lot of times. So when there are breaks, you might be huddling up as a team, showing a lot of love, comfort. But when it comes to work, it's very tough to actually pull back and say, hey, maybe I need to realize that someone's going through something of their own.
Yeah. I think that also comes back to just like how competitive these spaces are, right? Like even within a team of, let's say, 5 people, 6 people, you'd have so much inner competition, and just the idea that, oh, I have to rise above the rest, that I have to rise to the top, that you spend a large majority of your times with these people, and yet because of the competition you don't know what the other person is working on. So the idea that, acha, even if I can talk to them, you don't know if they're in the space for it, sure, but also the fact that, oh, the idea that you have to sort of be a foot apart, or you have to be a little bit different and stand out, even in that team when you're supposed to be working together, you're actually working against each other. Not against also maybe, but I hope you understand what I'm saying. But I think there's a lot of competitiveness that comes with it.
I get what you're saying in terms of trying not to be redundant, in terms of looking, you want to look different, you want to look like you are standing apart, you want to look like you're doing better. Because that's when the recognition comes. That then, with my salary, my promotion, my bonus, my raise, my appraisal, all of that is very dependent on all of this. So I want to look different. And that different means inherently that I might have to compete with peers, people I'm actually might want to be friends with, and that like creates a very interesting dynamic between people.
Sometimes it's not also external. I feel like a lot of us go through it. When you graduate from, let's say, a bachelor or a master's college, in whatever field you're in, and you're starting your first job, the immediate thought is that I need to prove myself. Whether it's a very blatant thing or it's an inner thing, everyone's like, I have to prove that I'm worthy of being in this field and that I'm great at it. And that turns into an endless loop, which again leads you to not being able to say no, which makes you push yourself a little harder. And with time, it also leads to imposter syndrome in a lot of cases, where you don't know if you're worthy of what you're getting, but you're also like, I can't stop now, I don't know what to do. So it ends up becoming this whole loop. And sometimes it's not even about the people around you. Even if you take out the whole team and bring in the most compassionate people in the world, what you'll realize is that you might end up feeling the same way because you are hardwired that particular way.
I think it just becomes a
Thing that
cycle.
I want to add on here is that sorry, Gauri, carry on.
No. I was done. You go ahead, Anvesha.
I was going to say that when we talk about putting pressure on ourselves, graduating, working, etc., like personally, I have never been that person to, feel that way that, okay, I need to do this. It has more been about, okay, I'm equipped to do this, I have studied to do this, so I am capable and I am able to do this. What happens when you're catering to all these things, be it the respect aspect which Shreya was talking about in workspaces, be it the emotional thing what you're going on with family and work going on, working remotely, these are three things that I resonate with, which Shreya and Gauri talked about. Yet at the same time, sometimes what happens, you don't realize when these things creep up on you and they start to affect your overall ability to function and to take care of things. A lot of people don't, even by not putting the pressure on themselves, but just to be in that space where they have to be, because that is how it goes, that is what the society expectation of work and life is. In the middle of all that hustle, you don't realize, re- despite of the fact of not putting that pressure, it still creeps up on you in some way or the other.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's why it is all the more important for us to take a step back and actually reflect on how our journeys have been, how we wish them to be, right? And it starts, I think, definitely from ourselves. Everything begins at home. Charity, self-reflection, everything, I think. And yeah, and if there's nothing else, I think that brings an end to my portion. Over to Kanishka.
Yeah. So we've talked about guilt, shame, and we've talked about like where is it coming from? Is the source more internal or more external? So I think we've talked about comparison being competitive at the workplace. I think there's a lot of social comparison in terms of you need to get ahead of someone, you need to be better at what you do, or not even better, but at best. But what makes you not say no? The way you would be perceived at your workplace, and also how would you be labeled as? Are you not being ambitious enough? And not only at the workplace, but also how do you feel about yourselves not being ambitious enough if you're taking breaks or you want a little breather for yourself? So I think there's a lot of surveys and research being done on the mental well-being of people at workplace, and employers are taking steps towards the mental well-being, but like, is it effective? There's been studies, there's a survey report by Deloitte which shows that employers are taking stand, but there's a disappointment on the end of the initiatives employers are taking because there's still the stigma attached. People are not being able to talk about it. So I think asking Ashna and Vesha, talking about the environment where you come from, the background where you come from, the corporate life. I've also had an experience of corporate life. We are the ones who can break the stigma by talking about mental health challenges. So what is this thing which kind of pulls us back and kind of makes us hesitant to talk about mental health challenges at workplace?
In a country like India alone, I think the concept of stigma is far fetched enough. We know that people, let alone in the workplace, even in their personal lives, have a tough time admitting that they might not be doing okay, because that means you're weak. That means you just can't manage yourself. It makes you incapable in some way or the other. I have a very simple view to mental well being in the workplace, which is that it's not a quota or a checklist that has to be ticked off that we're doing these 10 things for the well being of our employees, but it's an everyday practice. You know, helping someone in their toughest times can be as, I mean, a simple step can just be being compassionate, being kind, understanding that everyone goes through things, and normalizing a conversation in the workplace where one person can just say, hey, I don't think I can do it today. And people, rather than judging the person, making them feel like less of a person, can actually take a step back and say, hey, do you need to talk about it? You know, do you need some time? It's no secret that this hustle culture has gotten all of us in this whole spiral. And I truly believe that, you know, even when I was in the workspace, we'd joke every day, every coffee, tea break, every lunch break, we'd be joking about आज नहीं हो रहा. Or, you know, मैं तो ये काम करते करते बस यही है मेरा. I will not be able to move past this. But the point is, even when I said it as a joke, or one of my friends said it as a joke, I personally never stopped and asked, hey, is there some seriousness in all of this? Why does it have to reach an extreme of someone hurting themselves for us to be talking about these things? So that is one of the reasons I actually got into this whole space, and which is why I teamed up with Anvesha to start Flutter Care, which is because I was working 14 to 16 hours and I realized that it was affecting my sanity. And what I realized was that the more people I spoke to, everyone was going through the same thing. And this is across fields. This doesn't have to be just corporates, you know. And I just feel like what we try internally with our team here also is to create an ecosystem where everyone can talk, where everyone can maybe share that they might not be doing okay, and we try understanding it. When it comes to corporates or other workspaces in general, I think there's a long battle ahead of us. But it all starts with kindness and intent. The intent to want to genuinely create a workplace makes people feel like they are mentally at peace. Anvesha, I hand over to you.
I feel I agree with everything that Ashna is saying, and all of this is so relevant and so relatable. At the same time, I am someone who has never worked in the corporate space. I come from a family business background, and working there, your colleagues, your peers are your family members, your fathers, and your brother or your sister. and then there are the employees. So when you join that space, you are joining in a leadership position. Everybody is trying to look up to you. A family business is a space where there are very many old employees who have been who are very loyal and long engaged with the people of your family. When you are joining that space and you're trying to bring about the changes of your generation, and you understand that those older people might not resonate with those or are finding it difficult to accept that kind of change, that is what bums you out a little bit. And I feel in that space where you're trying to hold on to what your family has built and still bring about the transformation that you want to, those struggles are something that you cannot share with everybody. So for example, if I'm sharing an idea that I have about our work with my father, and he is not in line or is not very understanding of that, in a family business space I cannot go and rant about it to my colleagues or my family members about it. Nobody. So it is something that you're dealing with on your own, that okay, I want to do things, but how do I? that that handover of administrative work, decision making, etc., it is such a big task, because everybody is looking up to you, but nobody is ready for that change what this new person will bring, because they're all set in their ways. So I feel that just creates a lot of difficulty for both the employees and the employers in that space. I think that mental health is a remote concept when it comes to family businesses, from my experience. Like, I feel now that we are more aware, there should if there should be meetings amongst the family members. I feel there should be group therapies where all the people in the leadership position can go and sort those things and make those decisions, because you cannot fight it out with your family members. You need to do it in a very cordial way. It gives you a lot of emotional baggage as well if your work is not going okay, because you're working with family over there. Similarly, for the employees who are there, it gets difficult because they don't know whom they are looking at. Someone who will be their future and somebody who has been leading them all this time. So those, I feel, when the leaders start conversations, that is what brings about change. So as and when people who are the decision makers and leaders in a position at a workplace, when they start talking about their issues, when they start being relatable to everybody, that is where the change actually begins, and everybody starts to go in that direction, where they also give a thought to their mental well-being. All these things, taking eco breaks and mental health days, these are remote concepts in those spaces. So I feel as and when we're coming in and we speak about these things, only then will that change actually come.
And thanks, Anvisha, providing us.
At the same time, realizing all these things has, I was saying, realizing from the family business workspace is what brought me to join Ashna and start Flutter Care. That there are times when you don't realize the existence of a concept's importance in your life, and there are spaces where these things are not available and not spoken about. So those needs to be normalized, and the accessibility of these things has to be realized amongst people.
Yes,
That's from my
definitely.
end.
And
Kanishka, over to
yeah,
you.
thank you so much for giving us with such an insight about the family businesses. I think not everybody is aware about how mental well-being is affected at family businesses, because definitely now we can see that there's a lot of friction at these places and people are unaware about. So what do you think is the need of the hour? Is the need of the hour is adopting more acceptance, is inculcating sensitivity in all the workplaces, not in only the sphere of mental health? And can just laying down the policies and inculcating EAPs, employees wellness programs, can bring about a change? Because I don't think that can by itself remove the stigma around mental health challenges what people face. So definitely being sensitive around it, creating and building an environment which promotes open communication, where it's normalized that it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to be not do your best, it's okay to fail, and also accepting failure as a part of your work life, personal life, wherever you work. I think that is all more important to also bring a change internally as well as externally. So I think from employers' end, we need them to understand and we need them to inculcate an environment where we feel confident enough to share our issues. So for that, we would need managers and peoples and leaders who are trained in this respective field to probably help foster more empathy and understanding at these workplaces. To achieve work-life balance has become major issues, as we talked about not being able to disconnect from work after office hours. So how can we say no? How can we just move towards flexible working hours or ask what we expect from the workplaces? Then I think there can come the accessibility to counseling and therapy, more awareness about it, more workshops about it. So this is why we are having this webinar, to create more awareness, to also to know like what other people feel. So as a mental health organization, Ashna and Vesha, what do you think, what you guys plan on to bring about a change in terms of well-being, mental well-being of employees, and break the cycle?
Anvesha, do you want to take this first?
When it comes to breaking these cycles, as I said, I feel the first step has to be to start the conversation. The more we speak about it, the more we normalize it, the more other people are accepting of it. And those, when you lead by example, that is what makes other people realize that something like this is also important. When people look up to you, it somewhat becomes your responsibility to also take care of their well-being along with yours. So that is something very important. So having all these programs in workspaces, EAPs, etc., is obviously essential. But when we normalize these things, only then people will actually access them. So I feel the more we speak about it, the more conversations are happening. When employees and employers are speaking about well-being with each other, amongst each other, that is what will actually bring about the real change. Ashna, on to you.
In addition to what Anvesha said, EAP programs and all such programs are things that can only help make people more aware of what actually exists or what reality is like. Us as an organization or us as people that genuinely want to help this cause can only act as enablers and supporters to it. So, if you ask me what we can do at best is we can fight the world, put ourselves out there, go to as many people, conduct as many workshops. But somewhere it's going to be a slow and steady battle, of course, and a journey. And at the same time, I think, good times, better times seem to be coming because with each generation that's passing, we're realizing that this conversation is becoming more and more normalized. Talking about mental health issues, mental health awareness as a concept is becoming a much bigger thing. I think what we also need to do is accept that earlier generations have been brought up or raised with a particular mindset. And we can't sit here and fight all of it. But what we can do is say, hey, this is your perspective. We respect it. This is a new age perspective. And people do go through things. I think our only role in all of this can be that no matter where we go, what we do, we just try to show people by the way we talk, by the way we even are with them, that it's all okay. The ultimate goal of all of this will be to have a day where EAPs aren't even required, when people in organizations are naturally just talking to each other and it's all smooth sailing in terms of mental well being. But yeah, till that happens, we're here for that. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I think having a community, having peer support, encouraging each other makes a lot of difference. Just taking back the confidentiality of what your peers share with you makes a lot of more sense because you feel heard. You feel that yeah, somebody's there, you're being understand, somebody's there to understand you. So more than these wellness programs, though they are important, but we need to stand for each other. And yeah, there's a lot of transition being in place, transformation in place with upcoming generation who have a lot more expectations, and there are people who have completely done their studies in pandemic and now they're shifting to this work culture where we are working in person, shifting to more of office culture. There's a lot of anxiousness, social anxiety coming with it. I think we can together make a space which is comfortable for our peers and help each other grow and take mental health in a more striving way and work forward for it. So yeah, that is from my end. I think, do we have any questions from the audience? Would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think all of you brought up such good points, but I think I want to come back to that conversation about systemic. I think what it comes down to is just the fact that there are two simultaneous things that are going to happen essentially, right? Where one, actually more than two, I lie. One is of course just how workplaces function and the ideologies they have in terms of work, productivity, hierarchy, what expectation in that aspect. Two is like culturally, how are we driven? How are we productivity based? It is a capitalistic society. My worth is decided by, in school is decided by how high my marks are. And when I'm outside of school, it's decided by what my salary is or how important my employees think I am. And like, there are no marks in when you're in a workplace, but then that gets, ki, oh, am I getting validated enough, am I being noticed enough, is my salary, like, if I getting the raise, do I have a better raise, the higher my raise, the more I obviously I'm working better, and that's getting noticed. So and then it comes down to an individual level, how we interact with our culture, how we interact with our internal struggles, how we interact with our families, with our friends, with peers, and how all those internalized sort of takeaways from every single interaction also carries with us into a workplace. So, like, it's like you kind of go from very like a magnified to a very like myopic. I don't know what the word is. Ignore me. Like like very zoomed in sort of vision essentially. Um, and work needs to be done at every level. I think for big changes to start happening at workplace, it has to be top down. It has to be right at the top, and it has to be like collectively where organizations start to realize that it can't continue like this, because we have now workforces entering who are not going to completely align with how work has been going, how workforces have been functioning, what cultures have already been set. And company culture is going to be very, very much in like the forefront of how employees are like appreciating work. And then at the same time, at very individual levels, for people to start actually practicing and making work-life balance, sometimes I literally tell clients कि आप अपने calendar में डालो, put it in your calendar that for 30 minutes you're going to do something for yourself. I'm sure it's counterintuitive. You want this to be instinctual, but we don't know. We have not learned it. It's not something that very like it just comes to us. It's something we have to carve out time for. And we will have to start pushing ourselves and almost forcing ourselves to engage in this like breaking away and disconnection.
You said it right that we can't work in isolation. What we do in personal lives, even the beginning of the day, in what mindset, in what mood we come to the office, definitely reflects our whole day, what the day is going to look like, how it's going to affect our productivity, our efficiency. So definitely when we talk about from company's point of view, employees' mental well-being definitely affects productivity at workplace. So in that sense also, it's very important to take up these activities and be mindful of what your employees are feeling, how they're working today? Is it getting overwhelming for them? So I think conversations, acknowledgement, constant feedback can help us to have a more inclusive environment and to be accepted in all our ways and means.
And also general kindness. I think that goes
One
a long way.
last thing that I want to ask here is that sometimes saying one last question I want to ask here is, we all are, as we're speaking about this, we're addressing that these are the changes that need to be brought about to bring. I want to speak about how do we realize that these changes are required in a workspace. You guys, being psychologists, having a more technical knowledge of things, can you highlight some points which could be indicative of an unhealthy workplace culture that people need to realize and then bring about those changes in their lifestyle?
So, okay, to answer this, like the recognizing toxic workplace versus what can I do to make it better for myself might not completely align at both points, or completely align. One, of course, is how to recognize that a workplace might not be healthy for you, and there are certain segments, right? A, though, is my physical health is getting affected. I'm not sleeping enough. I'm not able to eat enough. I have to prioritize just like work over like basic things that I need to do to take care of myself. I'm not able to take a break. My body is not feeling rested. If I'm waking up in the morning, I'm exhausted throughout the day, like consistent exhaustion. That is also an aspect. um, Random ache pains, neck pains, back pains, unnecessarily when you're not doing anything excessive, but there's always like pain. That's just one way of gauging that you might not be completely healthy when it comes to like work right now. In terms of mental health, of course, and I'm like really rushing through this, is, just I don't want to get up in the morning and actually go to work. I don't feel like doing something. It takes a lot of energy to actually be focused and put like, effort into what work I'm doing. Maybe I enjoyed this before and I don't enjoy this anymore. I'm irritated or I'm emotionally not as regulated, which means that I'm snapping, I'm reactive, I might be rude unnecessarily. I might be carrying some of my stuff home. So, I'm not obviously able to express that anger at work. So I'm expressing that anger at home. And it's misplaced, it's like very volatile. And of course, like sometimes it's also just sad or just upset about being in a workplace, or I'm not able to work to my full potential. um, uh, Sometimes it's also that you start falling sick a lot more often because your immunity is impacted by your mental health not being in a good enough place. These are some ways that you can recognize, that I might not be doing well. In terms of how to do better, if your workplace, like, hi, we're really sorry about that. There was a technical glitch. We've all just jumped on our hotspots really quickly. Um, but yes, as I was saying, when it comes to figuring out how to make things better for yourself, um, if like the people are toxic and if the workplace itself is putting a lot of pressure and you're not able to keep up and you think that is like the external factor is what is causing a lot of the trouble, that is when it's time to kind of analyze it. Is this what I want to be doing? reassessing that is this a safe environment for me, is this a comfortable environment for me, and again, always knowing that nothing comes at the cost of my health and safety. I think that is like the tagline of it all, that nothing should come at the cost of my well-being, because that's not worth it. I'm essentially earning money for myself eventually, like to enjoy life. And when I'm not able to do that, and if I'm being sick or I'm just being unhappy all the time, then there is like that moment where you want to kind of question yourself that, what's going on? Like, where is the disconnect? Where am I missing things? I think beyond that also is actually taking out time and being very adamant about how you take care of yourself, whether it's exercise, whether it's actually taking some time for yourself, whether it's learning how to disconnect completely. Sometimes people use their travel time to and from work to disengage, and that really works for them. So it's about finding those little things for yourself to do, to feel better, to feel disconnected, to feel recharged, to feel rested.
I'm just going to make an addition to what you said, Shreya, and I feel like this is something that's very important, which is that I feel from the get go, from when we're kids, we're put in this rat race. When we're in school, it's about getting to the best college. When it's in college, it's about getting the best job. When it's getting a job, it's about getting the best promotions, etc. I feel like, while this is a very important conversation in the workspace, yes, this is also a conversation we should be having at the grassroots level. At every stage in life, I feel it's important to kind of talk about mental health and mental well-being, so that putting yourself first is it becomes a systematic practice for things. It's almost like changing the narrative. You're completely shifting the thought process at its core, so that at each stage a person can say, hey, I'm prioritizing my mental well-being today.
Thank you so much for that. That completely makes sense too. Great. I think we can conclude at this point in space. Thank you so much to the audience for joining us, and for listening to us just dabble with our thoughts. Thank you to everyone who's joined as a facilitator and for sharing your thoughts. We appreciate what everyone has said today and brought to this space. Thank you so much, and we hope to thank you so much for your kind words. And we hope to engage in more such conversations